When the ship was found drifting in the open ocean, its sails were still fully raised. Its cargo was still stored neatly below deck, and the captain's boots were still beside his bed. A half-finished meal sat on the table. But every single person who'd been on board were completely gone. No bodies were ever recovered, no final struggle was ever witnessed, and the sea never offered any sort of explanation. If you like dark stories told at midnight, feel free to subscribe because it's midnight somewhere, and tonight I have a story for you. In November 1872, the American merchant ship, the Mary Celeste, departed from a New York harbour. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia. And to accompany the family members and the captain were 7 very experienced crew members. Their destination was for Genoa, Italy, and the ship's cargo consisted of around 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, which is highly flammable but a very, very valuable commodity. And the voyage was expected to be fairly routine. The crew was experienced, the ship was very sound, and the weather forecast was quite favourable. Nothing about the journey suggested what was about to happen. Now, on December 5th, 1872, nearly a month later, another ship, the Della Gratia, spotted a strange sight in the Atlantic Ocean between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. A lone ship drifted aimlessly in the distance. Its movements were erratic, its sails were hung awkwardly, and no signals were being exchanged. And when the Della Gratia's crew approached, they realised with growing unease that the drifting vessel was in fact the Mary Celeste. A boarding party climbed aboard the silent ship, and what they found would shock the maritime world. The Mary Celeste wasn't damaged. There was no sign of any sort of collision that may have happened. There was no fire damage anywhere to be seen, and there was no evidence of any sort of piracy. No blood, and no struggle, or no signs of struggle. And the navigational instruments were in place with the exception of the ship's chronometer and the sextant, which were missing. Now below deck, the cargo of alcohol was largely intact. In the captain's quarters, his boots stood beside his bed, his logbook was still sitting on the desk, and his child's belongings remained completely untouched. The ship was seaworthy, and it could have easily completed its voyage. Yet every single human being that was on board had completely vanished. Now, the final entry into the ship's log was dated November 25th, 1872, 10 days before the ship was discovered drifting. And at the time, the Mary Celeste was still over 400 miles from its final destination. There were no entries describing any sort of danger, no storms, no damage, and no threats recorded. And then the logbook simply stopped. Now, notably, one crucial piece of equipment was missing, and that was the lifeboat. And this meant that the crew had not disappeared individually, they'd left the ship altogether. But why would an entire crew, including a captain's wife and a young child, abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship in the open ocean? Now, the Mary Celeste was towed into Gibraltar, where an official salvage court hearing was conducted. And the investigators examined the hull, they examined the mast, they examined the cargo that the ship was carrying, as well as the navigational instruments and the crew's quarters, as well as the captain's records. And they reached one undeniable conclusion. There was no physical evidence of violence, no proof of any sort of mutiny, no evidence of piracy, and no sign of a catastrophic event. Despite months and months of inquiry, no explanation could be proven. Now, as always, when something mysterious happens like this, there are a lot of theories that get thrown around. One theory was pirates, and the idea of pirates was quickly dismissed because nothing of value had been stolen. The cargo still remained, and all the crew's money and their worldly possessions were completely untouched. Pirates would have no reason to take the people and leave everything else behind. The second theory was mutiny, and mutiny suggested that the crew turned on the captain. But again, this doesn't make any sense because the crew was hand selected and there was no history of any sort of unrest between the crew and the captain. There was no sign on the ship of any sort of struggle that may have unfolded, and mutiny would have almost certainly left some trail of evidence. But nobody was found and no evidence was found. Now, one of the most accepted theories involves the cargo of industrial strength alcohol, and it's believed that leaking barrels might have released toxic or explosive vapors, and fearing an imminent explosion, Captain Briggs might have ordered the crew into the lifeboat temporarily and tethered the lifeboat to the ship by a rope. But this theory raises a very chilling question. If the lifeboat broke free, they would have been left drifting in the open Atlantic, with no shelter, with no navigational instruments, and no chance of any sort of rescue. Another theory is that potentially a sudden natural event might have forced evacuation, yet the ship showed no storm damage, the sails were still raised, and the hull was still completely intact. And it didn't appear that the Mary Celeste had survived a violent encounter with nature via a freak wave or something like that. So the truth is that no theory fully explains why a seasoned captain, his family who are very, very precious to him, and a very capable crew would abandon a fully functioning ship in very calm waters and vanish completely off the face of the earth. And to this day, no bodies have ever been recovered, no final voyage of the lifeboat was ever recorded, and no survivors ever came forward. The fate of the Mary Celeste's crew remains one of the greatest mysteries in maritime history. So, a ship was found, but its people were not. The ocean returned the vessel, but it kept the lives that it had taken. If you like dark stories told at midnight, please subscribe because I release 3 new mysteries every single week. And until that time, I'll see you at midnight.